It was 7:42 p.m. when her phone buzzed. Not earlier, when she first sat down. Not later, when the restaurant started thinning out. Exactly 7:42 p.m. The kind of moment most people forget. But Vanessa Brooks would remember that time for the rest of her life. Because at 7:42 p.m., her husband told her he loved her, while sitting 3 tables away with another woman. Hey, welcome back to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson. If you're new here, this isn't just storytelling. It's real-life decisions, real consequences, and the kind of moments people wish they handled differently. Before we go any further, take 1 second. Hit that subscribe button, because stories like this don't just entertain you. They change how you see things. And tonight's story? It's not just about a lie. It's about the small decision she almost didn't make. The one that exposed everything. Let me ask you something. Have you ever ignored a feeling? Not a loud one. Not panic. Just something quiet. Sitting in your chest, telling you something isn't right. And instead of listening, you told yourself it's nothing. Yeah, that's where this story begins. Not with betrayal, but with silence. Vanessa Brooks was the kind of woman people described as easy to be around. She didn't argue over small things. She didn't demand attention. She didn't make situations harder than they needed to be. At work, she was reliable. At home, she was steady. In her marriage, she was accommodating, not weak, just careful. That's why she married Derek Lawson, not because of his money, though everyone assumed that, but because of how he made decisions. Quick, clear, confident. Derek built his empire the same way. Structured, controlled, efficient. And, in the beginning, Vanessa believed that kind of man brought stability. But stability and distance can look the same if you don't ask questions. That night, she hadn't planned to be out. It was supposed to be simple. Grab something to eat, go home, rest. Derek had already texted earlier. Running late, probably dinner with my mom. Don't wait up. That made sense. It fit the pattern, and Vanessa had learned to trust patterns. So she stopped at a quiet restaurant off the main road. Nothing special. Soft lighting, low music. People minding their own business. Perfect. She ordered something simple. Grilled chicken, water. No distractions, no expectations. Just a quiet evening. By 7:38 p.m., she finished eating. By 7:40 p.m., she paid the bill. By 7:41 p.m., she stood up to leave. And just as she reached the door, she realized something. She forgot her card. A small mistake. One of those things you could easily fix later. Cancel it. Replace it. Move on. She paused, hand on the door, halfway out, and for a moment, she almost didn't go back. It would have been easier to leave. No inconvenience, no interruption. Just walk away. But Vanessa wasn't the kind of person who left small things unfinished. That was her pattern. Handle it now. Fix it early. Avoid bigger problems later. That mindset built her life. It made her dependable. It made her stable. It made her someone people could trust. So she turned around. And that decision, quiet, practical, almost meaningless, became the moment everything changed. Before we continue, if you've ever ignored a small sign, or trusted something you shouldn't have, comment. I've been there, because what happens next? It doesn't explode. It reveals. Vanessa stepped back inside. Nothing looked different. Same music, same voices, same calm atmosphere. She walked toward her table, focused on one thing, her card. No distractions, just in and out. She reached the table, picked it up, turned, and then she saw him, 3 tables away, near the window. Derek, her husband. Her body didn't react immediately, because her mind hadn't caught up yet, because he wasn't supposed to be there, because he had already told her where he was. But reality doesn't adjust to comfort. He wasn't alone. Across from him sat a woman, confident, relaxed, the kind of woman who didn't check her phone or scan the room, the kind who knew exactly why she was there. And Derek? He looked different, not distant, not distracted, present. The kind of present Vanessa hadn't felt from him in a long time. Then, her phone buzzed. She didn't need to check it, but she did, slowly. Stuck at Mum's for dinner. Love you. 7:42 p.m. The same moment she was standing there. The same second he was looking at someone else. The same minute everything she thought was stable quietly shifted. No shouting, no scene, no tears. Just understanding. And sometimes, that's heavier than anything loud. She looked at him one last time. Not long, just enough to accept what was real. Then she turned, walked out. And this time, she didn't forget anything. The door closed behind her, and the night air met her face like nothing had happened. No sound followed her out. No voice called her name. No sudden interruption to stop what she had just seen. The world kept moving. Cars passed. Someone laughed across the street. A bike rolled by like it was any other evening. And for a few seconds, Vanessa just stood there, not frozen, not confused, just still. There's a moment when something shifts inside you. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that quietly rearranges how you see everything. That was this moment. Not the text, not even Derek sitting there, but the combination of both. The ease of the lie, the timing of it, the fact that it fits so naturally into his routine. Vanessa didn't cry. That's important. Because people assume pain always shows itself immediately. It doesn't. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it organizes itself first. She walked to her car, unlocked it, and sat inside without turning the engine on. Her phone was still in her hand. The message still open. Stuck at Mum's for dinner. Love you. She read it again, not because she didn't understand it, but because she did. There were so many things she could have done in that moment. She could have gone back in. She could have called him. She could have sent a message. Something sharp. Something undeniable. She could have forced the truth out into the open right there. But Vanessa had never been impulsive. Every decision she made passed through a filter first. Will this make things worse? Will this solve anything? What happens after? And right now, she wasn't ready for after, so she placed her phone face down on her lap, took a breath, and turned the key in the ignition. On the drive home, she didn't play music, didn't call anyone, didn't try to distract herself. She let the silence sit, because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't trying to fix how she felt. She was trying to understand it. There's something people don't talk about enough. You don't lose trust all at once. You lose it in small pieces, moments you overlook, questions you don't ask, answers you accept too quickly. And as Vanessa drove, those moments began lining up. Not randomly, clearly, the late nights that didn't need explaining. The conversations that stayed surface level. The way Derek had become more efficient with his words, but less present with his attention. None of it had seemed like a problem on its own, but together, it formed a pattern she could no longer ignore. By the time she got home, it wasn't confusion she felt. It was clarity. The house was quiet when she walked in, exactly the way she had left it. Everything in its place, everything controlled. Vanessa set her keys down gently and moved through the kitchen out of habit. She filled a kettle with water, set it on the stove, turned the knob. It was something she always did when she needed to think, not because she needed tea, but because she needed time. As the water began to heat, she leaned lightly against the counter. Her eyes rested on nothing in particular, but her mind, it was moving carefully now, not spiraling, not panicking, just connecting. The truth wasn't shocking. That's what surprised her most. It didn't feel like something new had entered her life. It felt like something hidden had finally stepped forward. And that realization carried weight, because it meant one thing: this didn't start tonight. The kettle clicked softly as it heated. Vanessa reached for a cup, moving slowly, deliberately. Every action grounded, every movement intentional. There's a kind of strength people overlook. The quiet kind. The kind that doesn't react immediately. The kind that waits, observes, understands. Vanessa had always had that, but until now, she had used it to maintain peace. Tonight, it was doing something different. It was asking her a question, one she couldn't ignore anymore. What have you been accepting? Just to keep things calm. The kettle began to whistle. She turned it off, poured the water, watched the steam rise, and for the first time, she didn't rush to calm herself down. She let the discomfort stay, because it mattered. Time passed. She didn't check the clock, didn't check her phone again. She didn't need more information. She already had enough. At 9:27 p.m., she heard the door unlock, right on time. Derek walked in like he always did. Measured steps, calm expression. His tie loosened just enough to signal the end of the day. "Hey," he said, placing his keys in the same ceramic bowl. Routine, predictable. Vanessa didn't turn immediately. She stirred her tea once, set the spoon down, then looked at him. "Hey," she replied. Nothing in her voice gave anything away. Not because she was hiding, but because she wasn't reacting. "Dinner ran late," Derek added, walking further inside. "Mom wasn't feeling great, so I stayed longer." The lie came easily. Not forced, not hesitant, just smooth. And that told her more than anything else. Vanessa nodded once. "I figured." That was it. No questions, no tension, no shift in tone. And for a moment, that almost bothered her more than the lie itself, because it showed how easy it was, how normal this had become. Derek moved past her, loosening his watch. "Did you eat?" he asked. "Yes." "What did you get?" "Something light." He nodded, already halfway focused on something else. That used to be enough for her. Simple conversations, no pressure, no conflict. But now, she heard it differently, not as peace, but as distance. And distance, she realized, doesn't happen all at once. It builds quietly, with every moment you choose not to look closer. Vanessa picked up her cup and took a slow sip. Her eyes rested on Derek, not studying him, not analyzing, just seeing him for who he was, not who she had assumed him to be. And that difference? It mattered, because love built on assumption can survive a long time. But love built on truth? That requires something else entirely. Before we go further, I want you to think about this. Have you ever stayed quiet? Not because you didn't know the truth, but because saying it out loud would change everything. If that's you, drop a comment. I stayed quiet. Because what Vanessa does next isn't loud, but it's the moment her life starts to shift. That night, she didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, she made a different decision. She decided to pay attention, not to prove anything, not to catch him, but to understand something she had ignored for too long. And sometimes, that's where real change begins. Not with confrontation, but with awareness. Vanessa placed her cup down gently, turned off the kitchen light, and walked upstairs. Derek didn't notice the difference. Not yet. But something had already changed. Not in him. And that was the beginning of everything. If this part of the story made you pause, think, or even see yourself in Vanessa, don't scroll away just yet. Because what she just discovered isn't even the hardest part. The real question is, what do you do after you see the truth? If you've ever stayed quiet when something didn't feel right, or trusted someone just because it was easier than asking questions, go ahead and comment below. I've been there. Let's talk about it. And if you want more stories that don't just entertain, but actually teach you something about life, love, and decisions, make sure you like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson. Because, in the next chapter, you'll understand exactly how she became the kind of woman who stayed silent for so long. There wasn't a moment in Vanessa Brooks's life where she decided to become quiet. It didn't happen all at once. It happened slowly, in pieces, in moments that didn't seem important at the time. Long before Derek Lawson ever entered her life, Vanessa had already learned something most people don't realize they're learning: how to keep things from falling apart. She grew up in a small house where nothing was ever completely stable, but nothing was ever completely broken either. Bills were paid. Eventually, arguments happened, but never loudly enough for the neighbors to notice. Love existed, but it didn't always feel secure. Her mother believed in keeping the peace, not fixing problems, not confronting them, just keeping things from getting worse. Some things aren't worth arguing over, her mother would say. And as a child, Vanessa believed that, because, when her mother stayed quiet, the house stayed calm. Calm became her definition of safety. Her father wasn't a bad man, but he was inconsistent. Present one day, distant the next, apologetic when things went wrong, but never quite changed long enough for it to matter. And Vanessa noticed something early. No one really held him accountable. Not because they didn't care, but because confronting him always created tension. And tension? That was something her mother avoided at all costs. So Vanessa learned a different kind of strength. Not the kind that speaks up, the kind that adjusts. She learned how to read moods before words were spoken. She learned when to stay out of the way. She learned how to make things easier for everyone else, even if it meant ignoring how she felt. By the time she was a teenager, it was second nature. Don't push too hard. Don't ask too many questions. Don't create problems where things seem fine. And that mindset followed her into adulthood. In college, Vanessa was the reliable one. Group projects? She carried them. Deadlines? She met them early. Conflicts? She smoothed them over, trusted her, counted on her. But very few people really knew her, because being easy to be around often means being hard to fully understand. Vanessa didn't notice that part, because from her perspective, everything was working. She had stability. She had control. She had a life that didn't feel chaotic. And after growing up the way she did, that felt like success. After graduation, she took a job in operations management. It wasn't glamorous, but it was structured, predictable, clear. Problems came in. She solved them. Systems broke. She fixed them. It was the kind of environment where her personality thrived, because nothing there required emotional risk. You didn't have to guess how people felt. You didn't have to navigate complicated conversations. You just handled what was in front of you. And for a while, that was enough. Then she met Derek. It wasn't dramatic. No instant spark. No overwhelming chemistry. It was calm. They met at a networking event she almost didn't attend. Another small decision. Another moment that didn't seem important at the time. Derek Lawson stood out, but not in the way most people expected. He wasn't loud. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was focused, direct, intentional. When he spoke to Vanessa, he didn't flirt. He asked questions. Clear ones. Specific ones. What do you do? Do you enjoy it? What would you change if you could? Most people asked surface-level things. Derek didn't. And Vanessa noticed that, for the first time in a while, she felt like someone wasn't just interacting with her. They were observing her, and strangely, that felt safe. Because Derek wasn't emotional, he wasn't unpredictable, he wasn't overwhelming, he was controlled. And control, to Vanessa, felt like security. They started seeing each other shortly after that. The relationship moved steadily, not fast, not slow, just consistent. Derek didn't disappear for days. He didn't create confusion. He didn't play games. If he said he'd call, he called. If he made a plan, he followed through. And, for Vanessa, that mattered more than anything else. Because consistency felt like something she could rely on, something she didn't have to question. And questioning to her had always felt dangerous. Over time, their lives aligned naturally. Derek's world was structured around business, meetings, decisions, growth. Vanessa's world was structured around stability, routine, responsibility, order. They fit, not perfectly, but comfortably. And comfort can feel a lot like love. When you've spent most of your life avoiding discomfort, by the time Derek proposed, there were no major doubts, no dramatic hesitation, no overwhelming uncertainty, just a quiet belief. This makes sense. And sometimes, that belief is enough to say yes. Their marriage followed the same pattern. Structured, predictable, efficient. Derek worked. Vanessa supported, not in a submissive way, but in a practical one. She handled what needed to be handled. She adapted when things shifted. She didn't make demands that would complicate his already demanding world. And Derek appreciated that, at least in his own way. There were no big fights, no explosive arguments, no moments that clearly said, something is wrong. Just small gaps. Conversations that didn't go deep. Moments that didn't linger. Feelings that didn't get fully expressed. But those things are easy to ignore, because they don't interrupt your life. They just quietly reshape it. And Vanessa had spent her entire life learning how to live inside that kind of quiet. So when Derek started coming home later, she didn't question it. When his attention shifted more toward work, she understood. When conversations became shorter, she adjusted, because that's what she had always done. Adjust, not because she didn't care, but because caring for her had always meant maintaining peace. And peace, she believed, was what kept relationships intact. But what she didn't realize was that peace, without honesty, is just silence. And silence can hide a lot. By the time she stood in that restaurant, 3 tables away from the truth, this version of her didn't feel new. It felt familiar, because it had been built over years, choice by choice, moment by moment. And now, for the first time, she was starting to see it clearly. Not just what Derek had done, but how she had slowly shaped a life, where something like that could happen unnoticed. And that realization, it didn't break her, but it changed the way she looked at everything. The early years of Vanessa and Derek's marriage didn't feel wrong. That's what made everything harder to recognize later. Nothing was obviously broken. Nothing demanded urgent attention. If anything, from the outside, they looked like they had it figured out. Derek Lawson was building something most people only talked about. His company wasn't just growing. It was expanding in ways that required precision, timing, and control. Every decision mattered. Every move carried weight. And Vanessa? She became the quiet structure behind the life that allowed that kind of focus. Not in a way people could easily see, but in ways that mattered. She organized their home, managed schedules, handled the details Derek didn't have time for, and she did it well. There's a kind of pride that comes from being dependable, from knowing things run smoothly because of you. Vanessa carried that pride. But she carried something else too. Something she didn't fully notice at the time. Responsibility without recognition. Derek appreciated her, but he didn't always acknowledge her. There's a difference. Appreciation is internal. Acknowledgement is expressed, and over time, the absence of one begins to affect the other. At first, it showed up in small ways. Dinner's ready. Okay. I handled the payments. Good. I fixed the issue with the contractor. Perfect. Short responses. Efficient, not dismissive, but not connecting either. And Vanessa accepted it. Because from her perspective, he wasn't doing anything wrong. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't disrespectful. He wasn't neglecting responsibilities. He was just focused. And she told herself that was enough. Because it had to be. There's something people rarely admit. You can convince yourself something is working. just because it's not failing. And that's where Vanessa lived for a long time. Months turned into years. Derek's success grew. So did the demands on his time. Meetings stretched longer. Trips became more frequent. Conversations became shorter. And slowly, Vanessa started adjusting more, not because she was asked to, but because she anticipated what was needed. She stopped bringing up things that might distract him. She stopped asking questions that didn't have immediate answers. She stopped expecting long conversations at the end of the day. Not all at once. Just gradually, until it became normal. That's the thing about change. When it happens slowly, you don't always feel it. You adapt to it. And, by the time you notice, it already feels like your reality. Vanessa still believed in their marriage. That never changed. But what she believed it needed began to shift. Less connection, more understanding, less communication, more patience. And patience, she believed, was love. But patience without clarity can quietly turn into tolerance. And tolerance can make you accept things you never would have agreed to. There were moments, small ones, where something felt off, like when Derek started taking certain calls in another room. Not all calls, just some. Or when he began responding to messages a little too quickly. But only when she wasn't paying attention. Or when conversations about his day became more general. Busy, long, same as usual. Nothing specific, nothing detailed. And every time Vanessa noticed, she did the same thing. She let it go. Not because she didn't see it, but because she didn't want to turn something small into something bigger. Because in her mind, if she pushed too hard, she might create a problem that didn't need to exist. That belief shaped her reactions. And Derek? He learned from that, not consciously, not intentionally, but behavior adjusts to what it's allowed. And over time, he became more comfortable sharing less, not because he didn't care, but because nothing required him to do otherwise. There were no consequences, no tension, no reason to change. And when something works without resistance, people rarely question it, even if it's incomplete. One evening, about a year before that night at the restaurant, Vanessa had almost asked him something. It was late. He had come home later than usual. She had been sitting on the couch, waiting, not impatient, just present. When he walked in, she looked up. "How was your day?" she asked. "Long," he replied, loosening his tie. She nodded, paused. There was a question forming in her mind. Not sharp, not accusing, just simple. "Is everything okay between us?" It sat there, waiting. And for a moment, she considered asking it. But then she looked at him, tired, focused, already halfway thinking about something else. And she made a decision. She didn't ask. Instead, she said, "Do you want something to eat?" And just like that, the moment passed. That's how it happens. Not with big missed opportunities, but with small ones. Questions left unasked. Conversations redirected. Truth postponed. And over time, those moments build something. Distance, not obvious, not dramatic, but real. By the time Vanessa stood in that restaurant, none of this felt shocking. Because deep down, she had already seen pieces of it. She had just never put them together. Until now. There's a difference between not knowing and not wanting to know. And Vanessa was beginning to understand that she had lived in both. But that understanding came with something else. Responsibility, not for what Derek chose to do, but for what she chose to ignore. And that realization, it didn't come with guilt. It came with clarity. Because for the first time, she wasn't just looking at him, she was looking at herself. At the patterns she had repeated, the silence she had maintained, the peace she had protected at the cost of truth. And once you see that clearly, you can't go back to not seeing it. That's where change begins. Not when someone else admits what they've done, but when you understand what you've allowed. And Vanessa? She was starting to understand. Derek Lawson didn't wake up one day and decide to become a man who lies easily. That's not how it works. People don't usually choose deception as a starting point. They grow into it. Quietly, gradually, logically, at least in their own mind. Long before the money, before the company, before the lifestyle that demanded precision in every move, Derek learned something early. Control keeps things from falling apart. He grew up in a home where unpredictability wasn't loud, but it was constant. Plans changed without warning. Promises were made and adjusted later. Stability wasn't guaranteed. It was negotiated. His father believed in results, not explanations. If it works, he used to say, and Derek absorbed that. Because in a world where things shift without warning, control becomes a form of safety. He learned to anticipate problems before they happened, to think ahead, to adjust quickly, and, most importantly, to manage what people saw, not out of insecurity, but out of strategy. If people saw confidence, they trusted you. If they trusted you, you had room to move. If you had room to move, you stayed ahead. That mindset didn't just shape his personality, it built his success. By his late 20s, Derek wasn't just working hard, he was thinking differently. While others focused on effort, he focused on positioning. While others reacted, he anticipated. And that made him dangerous in business. Because he didn't wait for opportunities, he created them. His company didn't grow fast by accident. It grew because Derek made decisions most people avoided. Calculated risks, strategic silence, controlled communication. He didn't say everything he knew. He said what was necessary, and that worked. Investors trusted him. Partners respected him. Competitors underestimated him. Control gave him an edge. But control, when applied everywhere, starts to change how you handle more than just business. It changes how you handle people. When Derek met Vanessa, something about her felt compatible, not exciting, not unpredictable, stable. And stability, to him, was valuable. She didn't challenge him unnecessarily. She didn't complicate things. She didn't demand constant emotional attention. And in his mind, that made the relationship efficient. There were no unnecessary conflicts, no distractions from his focus. Everything fit into place. And at first, he respected that, but over time, he adapted to it. Because when someone doesn't question you, you begin to rely on that. Not consciously, not intentionally, but behavior adjusts to what it's allowed. And Vanessa allowed space. Space for him to focus. Space for him to lead. Space for him to operate without interruption. And Derek filled that space the only way he knew how. With control. He controlled his time, his attention, his communication, and slowly, he began controlling information. Not in big ways, not at first, just small omissions. I'll be late. Instead of why, busy day. Instead of what happened, work ran long. Instead of where he actually was, and those small choices felt harmless, because they made things easier. Easier than explaining, easier than opening conversations he didn't have time for, easier than dealing with emotions he didn't fully understand. So, he told himself something simple. It's not a big deal. And that belief, it's where things begin to shift, because once something feels small enough to justify, it becomes easier to repeat, and repetition turns behavior into habit. By the time Derek's company reached its peak growth phase, his life demanded even more control, more meetings, more pressure, more expectations, and with that, less patience for anything that felt unnecessary, including difficult conversations, not because he didn't care, but because he prioritized efficiency over emotional depth. And Vanessa? She didn't push back, she adapted, and in Derek's mind, that confirmed something. Everything is fine. That's the danger of silent relationships. They don't show you what's missing, they show you what's working. And Derek focused on what worked. The house ran smoothly. The relationship had no major conflicts. There were no dramatic breakdowns. So in his mind, there was no problem. But there was something else happening. Something quieter. He was becoming comfortable with partial truths, not full lies. Not at first. Just adjusted versions of reality. And adjusted truth is still deception, even if it feels harmless. There was a point. He didn't mark it, didn't recognize it, when the shift became permanent. When telling the full truth felt unnecessary. When simplifying reality felt justified. When managing perception became automatic. And once you reach that point, you don't feel like you're lying. You feel like you're maintaining control. That's how it made sense to him. Because, in business, control creates success. But, in relationships, control without honesty creates distance. Derek didn't see that yet. Because nothing had forced him to. There had been no consequences, no confrontation, no disruption to the system he had built. And when something works without resistance, people assume it's right, even when it's incomplete. That's how he ended up at that restaurant. Not as a sudden decision, not as a dramatic betrayal, but as the result of many small choices, choices that made sense at the time, choices that felt manageable, choices that didn't seem like they would lead anywhere significant, until they did. Because the truth about behavior is simple. You don't suddenly become someone different. You slowly become more of who you've been choosing to be. And Derek Lawson? He had been choosing control for a very long time. He just didn't realize what it was costing him, yet. The first time Derek crossed the line, it didn't feel like a line. That's what made it easy. There was no clear moment where he stopped and said, "This is wrong." No pause, no internal alarm, just a situation. That felt manageable. It started the way most things in his life did. With work. Her name was Clara Whitmore. She wasn't introduced as anything significant, just another professional connection. Someone brought in during a late-stage expansion project. She was sharp, focused, efficient, the kind of person who didn't waste time, and didn't expect you to either. Derek respected that immediately. Their first few conversations were strictly business, clear objectives, defined timelines, no unnecessary back and forth, and that, to Derek, felt comfortable, because it required nothing outside of what he already knew how to do. But there was something different about Clara. She asked questions Vanessa never asked. Not emotional ones, not personal ones, but direct ones. Why are you structuring it this way? What's the long-term risk if this fails? Is this decision based on data or pressure? She challenged him, not aggressively, but precisely. And Derek noticed, because in his world, most people agreed with him, not because he was always right, but because of who he was. Clara didn't adjust herself to his position. She engaged with it, and that created something unfamiliar. Not attraction, not yet, but attention. The kind that makes you stay a little longer in a conversation. The kind that makes you explain something more than you planned to, and slowly, those conversations extended, from meetings to follow-ups, from follow-ups to discussions that didn't need to happen immediately. Still professional, still structured, still justifiable. That's how it begins. Not with intention, but with allowance. There was a night, weeks before the restaurant, when things shifted slightly. They had stayed late finishing a proposal. The office had mostly emptied. The usual noise had settled into quiet. Clara leaned back in her chair, looking over the final numbers. "You don't slow down, do you?" she said. Derek gave a small, controlled smile. "It's how things get done." She nodded, then asked, "Or is it how you avoid stopping?" It wasn't an emotional question, but it wasn't strictly professional either, and for a brief moment, Derek didn't respond immediately, because it wasn't a question about work. It was a question about him, and that kind of question didn't fit into his usual system. So he did what he always did. He redirected. "Deadlines don't wait," he said. Clara didn't push further. She just nodded. But something in the conversation had shifted. A small opening. One that didn't feel dangerous, but mattered. After that night, their interactions changed, slightly. Still professional, still appropriate, but less distant. There were moments of silence that didn't feel awkward. Conversations that stretched just a little longer. A level of understanding that didn't require explanation. And Derek told himself something simple. It's nothing. Because it wasn't physical. It wasn't emotional, at least not in a way he recognized. It was just easier. Easier than explaining things at home. Easier than navigating conversations that required emotional presence. Easier than being seen in ways he wasn't used to. So he allowed it. Not as a decision, but as a continuation. That's how lines blur. Not when you cross them intentionally, but when you stop recognizing where they are. The messages started soon after. At first, they were work-related. Quick clarifications, updates, follow-ups. Then they became more flexible. "Did you get a chance to review that?" "Just finished. Looks solid." Then, "Long day." "Yeah, same." Nothing inappropriate. Nothing obvious, but no longer necessary. And necessity is usually what defines boundaries. Without it, things expand. Derek didn't hide the messages, but he didn't highlight them either. They existed in that space between visible and unnoticed. And Vanessa? She saw parts of it. A name appearing more often. A tone that felt slightly different. But nothing concrete. Nothing she could point to and say, "This is wrong." So she did what she had always done. She let it go. Meanwhile, Derek continued. Not because he was trying to build something, but because he wasn't stopping it. There's a difference. One is intentional. The other is passive. But both lead somewhere. The dinner, the night at the restaurant, wasn't planned as a secret meeting. At least, not in the way people imagine. It was positioned as a continuation of work. A discussion that ran late. A conversation that needed to happen. And maybe part of that was true, but not all of it. Because somewhere along the way, the reason changed. Not completely, but enough. Enough for it to no longer be just about work. And Derek knew that, not consciously, not in a way he would admit, but in the way he adjusted his actions, choosing a place slightly outside his usual routine, sitting in a part of the restaurant that felt less visible, keeping the conversation controlled, and then sending the message, "Stuck at Mom's for dinner, love you." That moment mattered, not because it was the first lie, but because it was the clearest one. There was no adjustment, no omission, no simplification. Just a direct contradiction of reality, and he sent it without hesitation, because by then, his behavior had already adapted. The line had already moved, and when lines move gradually, you don't feel the shift. You just operate within the new space. That's how he ended up there. Not as someone trying to destroy his marriage, not as someone making a dramatic choice, but as someone who had allowed small decisions to build into something larger than he intended. And the truth is, that's how most damage happens. Not through one big mistake, but through many small ones that feel harmless in the moment, until they're not. The house didn't feel different. That was the first thing Vanessa noticed the next morning. The same light filtered through the curtains, the same quiet filled the kitchen, the same routine waited for her to step into it. But something inside her had shifted, not loudly, not in a way anyone else could see, just enough to change how everything felt. Derek was already up, sitting at the kitchen island, scrolling through his phone, a cup of coffee beside him. "Morning," he said without looking up. "Morning." Vanessa moved through the kitchen the way she always did, measured, efficient, familiar. She poured herself a glass of water, reached for a plate, opened the fridge. From the outside, nothing had changed. But inside, she was paying attention now, not searching, not investigating, just noticing. There's a difference. When you're searching, you're trying to prove something. When you're noticing, you're allowing things to reveal themselves. Vanessa had moved into that second space, and it made everything clearer. Derek picked up his coffee, took a sip, and glanced at her briefly. "You heading out early today?" "Yes." "What time?" "Same as usual." He nodded. No follow-up, no curiosity, and for the first time, that stood out, not because it was new, but because she was seeing it differently. There was no attempt to connect, no interest in her day, no pause to engage beyond what was necessary. It had always been like this. She had just never labeled it. Before, she would have filled the gap, added something, extended the conversation. Now, she didn't. She let it stay exactly as it was. And in that silence, something became visible. Distance, not loud, not obvious, but present. Derek finished his coffee and stood. "I've got a long day," he said, grabbing his jacket. "Might be late again." Vanessa nodded once. "Okay." No question, no hesitation. And this time, it wasn't because she trusted the pattern, it was because she no longer relied on it. There's a shift that happens when you stop assuming things are true. You stop reacting. You start observing. And that's where Vanessa was now. Derek paused briefly, as if expecting something more. A question, a comment, a reaction. But none came, so he adjusted. "All right," he said, heading toward the door. "I'll text you." "Okay." The door closed behind him. And just like that, the house was quiet again, but it wasn't the same quiet. Before, it felt calm. Now, it felt revealing. Vanessa stood still for a moment, not thinking, not analyzing, just letting the moment settle. Then she moved, finished getting ready, picked up her bag, stepped outside. Her day continued, but her awareness stayed with her. At work, nothing had changed. Emails came in, tasks lined up, problems needed solving. Vanessa handled them the way she always did, efficiently, clearly, but something in her approach had shifted, not in what she did, but in how she experienced it. She wasn't just moving through tasks anymore. She was present, fully, and that presence made her notice things she usually overlooked, like how often people avoided direct conversations, how often problems were softened instead of addressed, how often clarity was replaced with comfort. It wasn't just her life, it was everywhere, and that realization felt grounding, because it reminded her, this wasn't just about Derek, this was about patterns people fall into without realizing. Later that afternoon, she sat across from Travis Reed in the break room. Travis had always been easy to talk to, not because he tried, but because he didn't avoid things. "You've been quiet lately," he said, unwrapping his lunch. Vanessa gave a small shrug, just thinking more. "About?" She paused, not because she didn't have an answer, but because she was deciding how much to say. "Things I didn't pay attention to before," she said. Travis nodded slowly. "That usually means something's been there for a while." She looked at him. "Yeah," she said. "It has." There was no follow-up question, no pressure to explain, just space. And that felt different, because it wasn't silence to avoid something. It was silence that allowed something to exist. That difference mattered. "Are you going to do something about it?" Travis asked after a moment. Vanessa leaned back slightly. "I don't know yet." "That's fair." He took a bite of his food, then added, "Just don't stay in the figuring it out stage too long." She raised an eyebrow slightly. "Why?" "Because sometimes," he said, "people use thinking as a way to delay action." Vanessa didn't respond immediately, because she understood what he meant, and more importantly, she recognized it, not in others, in herself. There it was again, that quiet clarity, not overwhelming, not emotional, just honest. By the time she left work that day, she wasn't confused, she wasn't even hurt, in the way she expected. What she felt was something else. Readiness, not to react, but to stop ignoring. That evening, she arrived home before Derek. The house felt the same, but she didn't move through it the same way. She didn't rush into routine, didn't fill the space with tasks. She sat and waited, not for him, for clarity, because she knew something now. Something simple, something undeniable. You can't unsee what you've already understood. And once you reach that point, the next step becomes inevitable. Not immediate, but necessary. Vanessa looked at her phone briefly. No message, no update, no explanation. And for the first time, she didn't need one, because what she had already seen was enough. The house stayed quiet longer than usual that night. Not empty, just waiting. Vanessa sat in the living room with the lights dimmed, her phone resting beside her, untouched. She wasn't scrolling, wasn't distracting herself. She was doing something she hadn't done in a long time. Nothing. And in that stillness, her thoughts didn't rush. They settled. There's a difference between thinking and understanding. Thinking circles, understanding lands, and Vanessa felt something land. Not a decision, not yet, but a direction. The sound of the door unlocking broke the quiet at 9:18 p.m. Earlier than the night before, Derek stepped in, closing the door behind him, adjusting his cuff as he walked inside. His eyes found her immediately. That was new. You're sitting in the dark? He asked, a hint of curiosity in his voice. Vanessa glanced toward the lamp beside her. I didn't notice. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the full explanation either. Derek set his keys down slowly, his attention lingering on her longer than usual. Something felt different. He couldn't name it, but he could feel it. How was your day? He asked, a simple question, one he didn't always ask. Vanessa looked at him, held his gaze for a second longer than she normally would. Productive, she said. He nodded, waited. That was it. No details, no extension. The conversation stopped where it started, and for the first time, that space between them felt noticeable. Derek moved toward the kitchen, loosening his tie. Did you eat? He asked. Yes. What did you have? Something light. Again. Short, complete, closed. Derek paused briefly at the counter, his hand resting near the edge. It wasn't the words. It was the absence of what usually came after. Vanessa would normally add something, a detail, a question, a bridge. Tonight, there was nothing. And that silence? It didn't feel calm. It felt unfamiliar. Derek poured himself a glass of water, his movements slower now. Not because he was tired, but because something wasn't aligning the way it usually did. You okay? He asked, turning slightly toward her. Vanessa nodded. I'm fine. Another complete answer. Another closed door. Derek studied her for a moment. Not deeply, not intentionally. Just enough to recognize something had shifted, and people who are used to control notice shifts quickly. Long day? He asked. Yes. A pause. Then he added, anything happen? The question hung there, not heavy, but not casual either. Vanessa looked at him again, and this time, she saw something clearly. Not guilt, not fear, but awareness. He could feel the difference. He just didn't understand it yet. Just work, she said. And that was true, but it wasn't everything. Derek nodded slowly, then turned away. Conversation over, but not resolved. That's what made it different. Before, silence meant everything was fine. Now, silence meant something was being held back. And that changes how it feels. Vanessa stood after a moment, walking toward the kitchen. Not to start a conversation, just to exist in the same space. She filled a glass with water, her movements calm, unhurried. Derek watched her briefly. There was something about her stillness. It wasn't passive. It wasn't distant. It was intentional. And that made it harder to read. You sure you're okay? He asked again. Vanessa took a sip of water, set the glass down. I am, she said. And this time, she didn't look away immediately. She held his gaze, not confrontational, but steady. And that did something. Because Derek wasn't used to being looked at like that. Not by her, not without softness, not without adjustment. This wasn't cold, but it wasn't accommodating either. It was neutral. And neutrality, in a relationship built on quiet adjustment, feels unfamiliar. Derek shifted slightly, picking up his glass again. All right, he said, but it didn't sound certain. Vanessa turned away first this time, walked past him, not avoiding, not retreating, just moving, and that movement said something without words. She wasn't waiting anymore. For explanation, for reassurance, for alignment. She had already seen enough. Later that night, they moved through the house the same way they always did. But everything felt slightly off, not broken, just different. Derek worked briefly on his laptop, Vanessa read a few pages of a book she hadn't touched in weeks. No tension, no argument, just distance. But this time, it wasn't unnoticed. Before going to bed, Derek glanced at his phone. A message appeared briefly on the screen. Clara. Vanessa saw the name. Not clearly, not intentionally, just enough. And this time, she didn't look away quickly. She didn't pretend she hadn't noticed. She just registered it and kept moving. Because now, she wasn't avoiding what she saw. She was allowing it to confirm what she already knew. That's the difference between suspicion and clarity. Suspicion asks questions. Clarity doesn't need to. As they lay in bed that night, the space between them felt the same physically, but emotionally, it had shifted. Not further apart, just more defined. Vanessa stared at the ceiling for a moment, not thinking about what he had done, but about what she would do next, because awareness always leads somewhere. It doesn't stay still. It moves toward action or back into silence. And Vanessa? She had spent too many years choosing silence. This time, something was different. She just hadn't said it out loud yet. The next morning didn't bring answers. It brought patterns, not new ones, just clearer ones. Vanessa didn't wake up with a plan. She didn't decide, today, I'm going to figure everything out. Instead, she did something much simpler. She paid attention, not emotionally, not reactively, objectively. There's a kind of clarity that comes when you stop trying to protect what you hope is true and start observing what is. That's where Vanessa was now. Derek moved through the morning the way he always did. Coffee, phone, quick updates, minimal conversation, nothing unusual. And that's exactly what made it noticeable. Because what once felt normal, now felt patterned. You heading out soon? He asked, scrolling through something on his screen. Yes. What time? Same. He nodded. Vanessa watched him. Not obviously, not in a way that would draw attention, just enough to notice details she had overlooked before, like how often he checked his phone. Not randomly, but in short, controlled intervals. Like he was expecting something, or someone, like how his responses were quick, but selective. He didn't answer everything, just certain messages, and how his expression shifted slightly when he did, not dramatically, just enough. That's the thing about patterns. They don't shout, they repeat, and repetition makes them visible, if you're looking. Vanessa wasn't trying to catch him. That wasn't her goal. She wasn't building a case. She was building understanding, because reacting without understanding leads to confusion, and she was done being confused. At work, her focus sharpened, not because her responsibilities had changed, but because her awareness had. She noticed inefficiencies faster, spoke more directly, asked clearer questions, and something interesting happened. People responded differently. Meetings were shorter, conversations were more productive, problems got resolved quicker. Clarity didn't just change how she saw things, it changed how others responded to her. That realization stayed with her, because it made something very clear. When you shift how you show up, everything around you adjusts. Later that afternoon, she sat across from Travis again. He glanced at her briefly, then said, "You look different today." Vanessa raised an eyebrow slightly. Different? How? Focused, he said, but not stressed. She considered that. That's accurate. Travis nodded. So, you figured something out? Vanessa leaned back slightly in her chair. Not everything, she said, but enough. Enough for what? She paused. Because the answer mattered. Enough to stop pretending I don't see what's in front of me. Travis didn't respond immediately. Not because he didn't understand, but because he did. That changes things, he said. Yes, Vanessa replied. It does. There was no need to explain further, because some realizations don't need to be discussed. They need to be acted on. That evening, she didn't go straight home. Not to avoid anything, but because she didn't feel the need to rush back into a space that no longer required her immediate presence. She stopped at a small cafe instead, ordered coffee, sat near the window, and let herself think, not about Derek, not about the woman, but about herself. There's a moment, after clarity sets in, where you begin asking a different kind of question. Not what are they doing, but what have I been allowing? And that question, it shifts everything, because it moves the focus from them to you. Vanessa sat there for a long time, not overwhelmed, not emotional, just honest. She thought about the conversations she had avoided, the questions she had softened, the moments she had redirected, not because she was weak, but because she believed peace was more important than discomfort. And now, she was starting to understand something. Peace without truth is just delay. Eventually, everything surfaces. The only difference is whether you're prepared for it when it does. Vanessa took a slow sip of her coffee. Her mind wasn't racing anymore. It was steady, And steadiness, she realized, wasn't something she had lost. It was something she had misused. She had used it to maintain a version of her life that felt stable, but wasn't fully honest. Now, she was going to use it differently. Not to avoid, but to face things. That night, when she got home, Derek was already there. Another shift. He was sitting on the couch, laptop open, but his attention wasn't fully on the screen. He looked up as she walked in. "You're late," he said. Not accusing, just noticing. Vanessa placed her bag down calmly. "I stopped somewhere." "Where?" "A cafe." He nodded, slowly. Another pause. Then, "Everything okay?" The question came again, but this time, it felt different. Not routine, intentional. Vanessa met his gaze, and for a moment, she considered answering fully, telling him everything she knew, everything she had seen, everything she understood now. But she didn't, not yet, because this wasn't about reacting. It was about timing, and timing matters when you want truth, not defense. "I'm fine," she said, and this time, it wasn't avoidance, it was control. Her control. Derek nodded, but his expression lingered, because something in her tone had changed, not softer, stronger. And that difference, he could feel it, even if he didn't understand it yet. Vanessa moved past him, heading toward the kitchen, not to escape, but to continue, because now, she wasn't waiting for something to happen. She was allowing things to reveal themselves fully. And once that happens, the next step becomes unavoidable. Not emotional, not explosive, just necessary. Patterns don't reveal themselves all at once. They repeat, until you can't ignore them. Over the next few days, Vanessa didn't change what she did. She changed how she saw. That distinction mattered, because she wasn't trying to interrupt anything. She was letting everything play out, fully, clearly, without interference. And the more she observed, the more consistent it became. Derek's routines hadn't changed, but now she could see the structure behind them. The timing of his messages, the pauses before certain replies, the way he shifted his phone slightly when notifications appeared. Not dramatically, not in a way meant to hide, just subtly. But subtlety becomes visible when you're no longer distracted. One evening they sat across from each other at the dining table. Dinner was quiet, not tense, not uncomfortable, just minimal. Vanessa placed her fork down gently, looked at him. "How was your day?" she asked. A simple question, one she had asked many times before, but this time, she listened differently. "Busy," Derek said. She nodded. "What kind of busy?" The question was new, not aggressive, not confrontational, just specific. Derek paused for a fraction of a second. "Meetings," he said. "Back to back." Vanessa held his gaze. "About?" Another pause. "Expansion stuff. Vague." And this time, she didn't fill the gap. She let the answer sit exactly as it was. Incomplete. And in that space, something became clear. Not just that he wasn't saying everything, but that he wasn't used to being asked. There's a difference between someone hiding something and someone who has never been required to explain. Derek wasn't scrambling. He wasn't nervous. He was adjusting, and that told her everything she needed to know. Vanessa picked up her glass, took a sip. "Sounds like a lot," she said. And just like that, the conversation ended, not because she didn't have more questions, but because she had enough answers. That night, she noticed something else. Derek stepped into the hallway to take a call. Not unusual. He had done that before. But this time, she paid attention to how long he stayed there. 7 minutes. Not long. Not suspicious on its own. But when he came back, his tone had shifted slightly, more relaxed. And he didn't mention the call. He never did. Before, that wouldn't have stood out. Now, it did. Not because she needed to know who he was talking to, but because she noticed what he chose not to share, and what people don't share often says more than what they do. Later that night, as they got ready for bed, Derek's phone lit up on the dresser. A message. Vanessa didn't move toward it, didn't lean in, but she saw the name. Clara. Again. This time, clear enough. Derek picked up the phone quickly. Too quickly. Not in panic, but in awareness. And that moment, it confirmed something. Not the relationship, but the shift. He knew, not that she had proof, but that something was different. And when awareness enters a space that once felt predictable, everything changes. Vanessa turned away, not because she was avoiding it, but because she didn't need to look any longer. Clarity doesn't require repetition. Once you see it, you see it. She lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling again, not replaying the restaurant, not imagining scenarios, just thinking forward. There's a moment in every situation like this where you reach a quiet conclusion, not spoken, not finalized, but understood. And Vanessa had reached hers. This wasn't about discovering more. She already knew enough. This was about what came next, because awareness, without action, eventually turns back into silence, and she had already lived in silence long enough. The next morning, everything looked the same again. But Vanessa didn't move the same way. She got ready, picked up her bag, paused at the door, and for a moment, she stood still, not hesitating, deciding. Then she stepped outside. That day, she didn't just go to work. She made a choice, not loud, not visible, but real. She wasn't going to wait anymore. Not for proof, not for confirmation, not for the right moment. Because the right moment had already passed. What remained was the honest one, and honesty, even when it's quiet, has weight. That evening, she would speak, not emotionally, not reactively, clearly, because now, she understood something she hadn't before. You don't confront someone to get the truth. You confront them when you're already ready to accept it. And Vanessa, she was ready. If you've made it this far, then you already understand something most people ignore. The truth doesn't always come from catching someone. Sometimes, it comes from finally paying attention. So, let me ask you, have you ever noticed the signs, but told yourself it wasn't enough to speak up? If that's you, drop a comment below. I saw it too. Because what Vanessa is about to do next, most people don't have the courage to do it. And trust me, you don't want to miss it. If you're enjoying this story and you want more real, powerful love stories that actually teach you something about life, go ahead and like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson. Because, in the next chapter, everything changes. She didn't rehearse what she was going to say. That was the first difference. Vanessa had always prepared for conversations, thought them through, softened the edges, adjusted her tone before she even spoke. But this time, she didn't, because this wasn't a conversation she needed to control. It was one she needed to be honest in. And honesty doesn't require perfection. It requires clarity. All day, she moved through her routine the same way she had the past few days. Focused, calm, intentional. But underneath that calm, there was something else. Not anxiety, not fear, readiness. Not to react, but to stop holding back. At work, Travis noticed it immediately. "You're about to do something," he said, leaning against the edge of her desk. Vanessa looked up briefly. "What makes you say that?" "You're too calm," he replied. "Not your usual calm, the kind right before someone makes a decision they've been avoiding." She held his gaze for a moment, then nodded slightly. "That obvious? Only if you're paying attention." Vanessa exhaled softly. "I think I've been paying attention for a while," she said. Travis crossed his arms. "Then whatever you're about to do, it's probably overdue." That word stayed with her. Overdue, not rushed, not impulsive, late. And that mattered, because it meant this wasn't a reaction. It was a response. A response to something that had been building long before that night at the restaurant. Later that evening, she arrived home just after Derek. Another small detail, he was already there, sitting in the living room, his phone in his hand, but not actively using it, waiting. He looked up as she walked in. "Hey," he said. "Hey." Her tone was steady, not distant, not warm, clear. She set her bag down, took off her shoes, and walked into the room. No rush, no hesitation. Derek watched her more closely this time, because the difference was no longer subtle. It was present. "Everything okay?" he asked, the question again, but now, it carried weight. Vanessa didn't answer immediately. She sat down across from him, not beside him. Across, that mattered. It created space, not distance, clarity. "I want to talk," she said. Simple, direct, no build-up, no softening. Derek straightened slightly. "About what?" Vanessa met his eyes. "Last week." A pause. Not long, but enough. "Okay," he said. Neutral, careful. Vanessa didn't look away. "I went back into the restaurant," she said. No accusation, no emotion in her tone. Just information. Derek's expression didn't change immediately, but something behind it did. Awareness. "I forgot my card," she continued. Still calm, still steady. "And I saw you." There it was. No build-up, no guessing. Just truth. The room didn't explode. Nothing dramatic happened. Just silence. The kind that doesn't avoid anything. The kind that waits. Derek leaned back slightly, processing. Not reacting. Not yet. Vanessa didn't rush to fill the silence. She let it sit. Because for the first time, she wasn't trying to make things easier. She was allowing things to be real. "I saw you," she repeated. Her voice didn't shake, not because it didn't matter, but because she had already accepted it. Derek exhaled slowly. "Okay," he said, not defensive, not apologetic, just acknowledging. And that response? It told her something immediately. He wasn't going to deny it, and that mattered, because denial would have meant something different. This meant he understood where things stood. Vanessa nodded once. "I'm not going to ask who she is," she said. Derek's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, in surprise, because that wasn't the question he expected. "I already know what matters," she added. Another pause, this one deeper. "What do you mean?" he asked. Vanessa leaned back slightly. "What matters isn't who she is," she said. "It's that you were there, and you chose to tell me something else. Clear, direct, no extra words, no emotional overload, just the point." Derek looked at her for a moment longer this time, not searching for an escape, trying to understand the position she was taking. "I didn't want to complicate things," he said, and there it was. The explanation, simple, controlled, logical. Vanessa nodded slightly. "I know," she said. And that response? It caught him off guard, because she wasn't arguing. She wasn't pushing. She wasn't reacting the way people usually do in moments like this. "I'm not confused about why you said it," she continued. "I'm clear about what it means." Derek's expression tightened slightly. "Which is?" he asked. Vanessa held his gaze. "It means you've been choosing what I know, instead of being honest." Silence. Again, but heavier now, because this time, it carried truth, not accusation. Understanding, and understanding is harder to argue with. Derek didn't respond immediately, because there wasn't an easy response. Not one that would shift the situation back into something manageable. Vanessa didn't rush him, didn't push further, because this wasn't about forcing a reaction. It was about establishing something clearly. She saw, she understood, and she wasn't going to ignore it anymore. "I'm not here to argue," she said after a moment. "I'm here because things aren't the way I thought they were." Her voice remained steady, grounded, not emotional, and that grounded tone, it changed the entire dynamic, because now, this wasn't a confrontation driven by anger. It was one driven by clarity, and clarity is harder to control. Derek leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. For the first time, he looked like he wasn't in control of the conversation, not because he couldn't respond, but because he couldn't redirect it. Vanessa had already set the direction, and now, everything that followed would have to be real. Derek didn't speak right away, not because he didn't have something to say, but because, for the first time in a long time, he couldn't rely on his usual approach. There was no quick adjustment that would smooth this over, no controlled version of events that would make everything fit neatly again, because Vanessa wasn't asking questions. She was stating what she already understood, and that changed everything. He leaned back slowly, his eyes still on her. "You're making it sound like there's more to it," he said. Vanessa shook her head slightly. "I'm not making it anything," she replied. "I'm describing what I saw, and what it means." Her tone stayed even, not sharp, not defensive, just clear. Derek exhaled quietly. "It was work," he said. The explanation came quickly, familiar, controlled. Vanessa nodded. "I figured you'd say that." No sarcasm, no challenge, just recognition. "And part of it probably was," she added. That made him pause, because she wasn't dismissing it completely. She was acknowledging it, without accepting it as the full truth. "That doesn't change the rest of it," she continued. Derek's jaw tightened slightly. "What rest of it?" he asked. Vanessa didn't rush. She let the question sit for a second, then answered simply, "That you lied." No raised voice, no emphasis, just the word. And, sometimes, one word is enough. Derek looked away briefly, not in guilt, in thought, because now, the conversation had moved past explanation. It had reached something deeper, accountability. "I didn't think it was a big deal," he said. There it was, the justification, not aggressive, not defensive, just honest in its own way. Vanessa studied him quietly. "I know," she said, and again, that response landed differently than he expected. Because she wasn't arguing the point, she was confirming it. "That's the problem," she added. Derek looked back at her. "What is?" Vanessa leaned forward slightly. "That it didn't feel like a big deal to you." Her voice remained steady. "But it is to me." A pause. Then, "Not just the dinner," she said. "The choice." That word mattered. Choice, because it shifted the focus from the situation to the decision behind it. "You chose to say something that wasn't true," she continued. "And you did it easily." Derek's expression changed slightly, not dramatically, but enough, because now, he wasn't just being told what he did. He was being shown how it looked from her side. "It wasn't about making things easier," Vanessa said. "It was about avoiding something." Derek didn't interrupt, didn't correct her, because part of him recognized that she wasn't wrong, even if he hadn't framed it that way himself. "I didn't want to create an issue," he said after a moment. Another justification. Another attempt to make it reasonable. Vanessa nodded slowly. And by doing that, she said, you created a different one. That landed because it was simple, direct, and true. Silence settled between them again, but this time, it wasn't uncertain. It was processing. Derek leaned back, running a hand briefly over his face. Your acting like this changes everything, he said. Vanessa didn't hesitate. It does. No pause, no reconsideration, just certainty. Derek frowned slightly. It was one night. Vanessa shook her head again. No, she said. It wasn't. That made him look at her more closely. Because now, she was saying something more. This didn't start that night, she continued. It just became visible. There it was. The shift. From event to pattern. And Derek felt that, because deep down, he knew it wasn't just one moment. It had been building. He just hadn't been forced to look at it. Until now. Vanessa sat back slightly. Her posture relaxed. Not because she was done, but because she wasn't carrying the weight the same way anymore. I'm not here to go back and forth, she said. I'm here to be clear about where things are. Derek didn't respond. He was listening now, fully, and that alone was different. I can't keep acting like everything is fine when it isn't, she said. And I won't pretend I don't see what I've already seen. Her words weren't emotional. They were grounded, and that grounding gave them weight. I need honesty, she added. Not partial, not adjusted, not simplified. Clear expectations, not demands, boundaries, and boundaries. Change dynamics. Derek let out a slow breath. What are you saying? He asked. Vanessa looked at him, and for the first time in the conversation, there was a hint of something deeper in her expression. Not anger, not sadness, but resolve. I'm saying things can't stay the way they've been, she replied. And if they do, she paused slightly. Then I won't stay in them. Silence. Heavy, not loud, but undeniable. Because now, the conversation had moved beyond explanation, beyond understanding, into consequence. Derek didn't speak, not immediately. Because this wasn't something he could adjust around. This wasn't something he could control with words. This required something different. Something he hadn't been using. Honesty. And that wasn't as easy as everything else had been. Vanessa stood slowly, not abruptly, just steadily. I'm not asking you to answer right now, she said. I'm giving you space to think about what this actually is. Derek looked up at her, still processing, still adjusting, but now, aware, fully. Vanessa turned and walked toward the hallway, not to escape, not to avoid, but because she had said what needed to be said. And sometimes, that's where the real shift begins, not in the conversation itself, but in what happens after, because now, the truth wasn't hidden anymore. It was out, clear, and impossible to ignore. The house didn't feel tense after the conversation. It felt exposed, not because anything had been broken, but because something had been uncovered. And once something is uncovered, you can't put it back the way it was. That night, they didn't argue. No raised voices, no slammed doors, no emotional outburst to release the pressure. Just space. Vanessa stayed upstairs longer than usual, not to avoid Derek, but to give the moment room to settle. Derek remained in the living room, sitting where she had left him, not working, not distracted, just still. And that was unfamiliar, because Derek didn't sit still. He moved, he solved, he adjusted, but this didn't present a problem he could fix with strategy. It presented something else, accountability, and accountability doesn't move at the same speed as control. It requires reflection, something he had avoided for a long time. He leaned back slowly, staring at nothing in particular. Vanessa's words replayed, not loudly, not aggressively, but clearly. It didn't feel like a big deal to you. That's the problem. Things can't stay the way they've been. Simple statements. But they carried weight. Because they weren't reactions. They were conclusions. And conclusions are harder to dismiss. Derek ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about what to say next. He was thinking about what was true. And that was different. Because truth doesn't always align with how you've been operating. It doesn't adjust itself to fit your system. It exposes where your system doesn't work. Upstairs, Vanessa sat on the edge of the bed, not overwhelmed, not emotional, just aware. There's a moment after you speak your truth where something shifts internally. Not relief, not victory, alignment. For the first time in a long time. What she saw, what she felt, and what she said matched. And that kind of alignment, it brings a quiet strength. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady. She wasn't waiting for Derek to come upstairs, wasn't anticipating what he would say, Because she had already done her part. The rest was his. That distinction mattered. Because, for years, Vanessa had carried more than her share of responsibility. Not intentionally, but through adjustment, through silence, through making things easier instead of clearer. Now, she wasn't doing that anymore. And that shift? It changed the balance between them. Downstairs, Derek picked up his phone. Not to scroll, not to distract himself. Just instinct. The screen lit up. Messages, emails, notifications, all the usual things. But none of them held his attention. Because for the first time, something in his personal life required more focus than his business. And he wasn't used to that. His thumb hovered briefly over a contact. Clara. He didn't open the message, didn't respond, just looked at the name. And for the first time, he saw it differently. Not as a connection, not as a conversation, but as a complication. Not because of what it was, but because of what it represented. A choice, one that had been easy before, but wasn't anymore. He locked the phone and set it down. That, alone, was a shift, not a resolution, but a pause. And pauses matter, because they interrupt patterns. And when patterns are interrupted, you're forced to notice them. Upstairs, Vanessa lay back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling. Her thoughts weren't racing. They were organized, clear. She wasn't replaying the conversation. She was looking ahead, because that's where decisions matter, not in what's already happened, but in what comes next. There's a misconception about moments like this. People think the hardest part is speaking up. It's not. The hardest part is what comes after, living with the truth you've acknowledged, not minimizing it, not ignoring it, not adjusting around it, facing it. And Vanessa was ready for that, because she understood something now. Avoiding discomfort doesn't protect you. It delays you. Eventually, you still have to deal with what's real. The next morning, the house felt different again. Not tense, but aware. Derek was already awake when Vanessa came downstairs. He wasn't on his phone, wasn't moving through his routine. He was sitting at the table, waiting. That was new. "Morning," he said. "Morning." Vanessa moved through the kitchen calmly, but she noticed it. The shift, not in what he said, but in how he was present. "I thought about what you said," Derek added. Direct, no delay, no avoidance. Vanessa turned slightly toward him, and for the first time since the conversation, she saw something different. Not control, not calculation, effort. "I haven't been as clear as I should have been," he said. Not an apology. Not yet. But closer. Vanessa nodded slightly. "That's true." No softening. No reassurance. Just acknowledgement. Because clarity doesn't need to be cushioned. Derek leaned forward slightly. "I didn't think it mattered the way it does," he continued. "Another step. Not complete, but moving." Vanessa held his gaze. "It matters because it changes how I see things," she said. "And once that changes, everything connected to it changes too." Derek listened. Fully. No interruption. No adjustment. Just listening. And that alone was different. Because before, he would have managed the conversation. Now, he was in it. There's a difference. And that difference? It's where real change starts. Not when someone says the right thing, but when they stop trying to control the outcome. Vanessa poured herself a glass of water, took a sip, set it down, then looked at him again. "We don't need to figure everything out today," she said, "but we do need to be honest about where we are. Clear, measured, real." Derek nodded slowly. "I understand that," he said. And for the first time, it didn't sound like something he was saying to move forward. It sounded like something he actually meant. That didn't fix anything. Not yet. But it changed something. And sometimes, change doesn't start with resolution. It starts with recognition. And for the first time, they were both seeing the same thing. Clearly, recognition didn't fix anything. It just removed the illusion that things were fine. And once that illusion is gone, you're left with a choice. Not a dramatic one, not something you announce, but a quiet decision. Do we face this honestly? Or do we go back to what's comfortable? That morning, Vanessa didn't stay in the kitchen long. Not because she was avoiding Derek, but because she understood something clearly now. They didn't need more conversation right away. They needed space to process what had already been said. And space, when used correctly, doesn't create distance. It creates clarity. Derek watched her move through the room. Same calm movements, same steady pace. But something had changed, not in her behavior, in her presence. She wasn't adjusting anymore. She wasn't filling gaps. She wasn't making things easier. She was simply being, and that felt different. Because for years, their relationship had relied on her ability to smooth things out. Now, that layer was gone. And without it, everything felt more exposed, Later that afternoon, Derek sat alone in his office. His laptop open, emails, waiting. Decisions lined up, but his focus wasn't there. It kept returning to the same place. Vanessa, not what she said, but how she said it. No anger, no accusations, just clarity. And clarity is difficult to ignore, because it doesn't give you anything to argue with. It just sits there, waiting for you to respond honestly. Derek leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling for a moment. He thought about the way things had been, not in detail, not in specific moments, but in patterns, the late nights, the shortened conversations, the things he chose not to explain. And for the first time, he didn't justify them. He saw them, clearly, not as necessary, but as convenient, and that difference mattered, because convenience isn't the same as intention, and relationships built on convenience eventually lose connection. His phone buzzed on the desk. He glanced at it. Clara, a simple message. Are we still on for later? Derek stared at the screen, not reacting, not responding, just considering. A few days ago, he wouldn't have thought twice. Now, it felt different, not because of the message, but because of what it represented. A continuation of something he hadn't fully acknowledged until now. He picked up the phone, paused, then typed, "Not tonight." He didn't add an explanation, didn't overthink it, just sent it. And that small action mattered, not because it solved anything, but because it interrupted something, a pattern. And breaking patterns is where change begins. That evening, when Derek got home, Vanessa was already there, sitting in the living room, reading, not waiting, just present. He stepped inside, closed the door quietly, and stood there for a moment, taking in the space, taking in her. "Hey," he said. "Hey." Same tone, same steadiness. But now, it carried something else, awareness. Derek walked into the room and sat down across from her again. Not beside, across, matching her position from the night before. That wasn't accidental. "I cancelled something tonight," he said. Direct. Vanessa looked up from her book, not surprised, not impressed, just listening. "Okay," she said. Derek nodded slightly. "I needed to think," he added. Another pause. Vanessa closed her book gently, set it aside. "What did you figure out?" she asked, not demanding, not leading, just open. Derek leaned forward slightly. "That I've been operating in a way that works for me," he said, "but not necessarily for us." Vanessa held his gaze. "That's accurate," she replied. Again, no cushioning, just truth. Derek exhaled slowly. "I didn't see it like that before," he continued, "and that's on me." There it was, the beginning of accountability, not complete, but real. Vanessa nodded once. "I'm not expecting perfection," she said. "I'm expecting honesty. Clear, defined, no confusion." Derek sat with that for a moment, then nodded. "I understand that," he said. And this time, it carried more weight. Because now, he wasn't just hearing her, he was adjusting himself, and that's different. Vanessa leaned back slightly. The tension in the room hadn't disappeared, but it had changed. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was focused, directed, towards something real. "There's something else," she said after a moment. Derek looked at her, waiting. "I'm not going back to how things were," she continued, her voice steady. "That version of us doesn't work anymore." Silence, not uncomfortable, just clear. Derek nodded, slowly. "I don't think it should," he said. And that response? It mattered, because it showed something important. He wasn't trying to restore the past. He was starting to face the present. And that's where real decisions happen, not in what used to be, but in what is. Vanessa studied him for a moment, not searching for flaws, not expecting failure, just observing, and for the first time in a long time, what she saw wasn't avoidance. It was effort, not perfect, but real, and real effort is where change has a chance, but only a chance. Because effort alone isn't enough. It has to be sustained, consistent, proven, over time. And Vanessa knew that. That's why she didn't respond emotionally, didn't soften, didn't lean in. She stayed grounded. Because this wasn't about a moment. It was about what came after. And what comes after is what defines everything. Change doesn't feel dramatic when it's real. It feels quiet. That was the first thing Vanessa noticed in the days that followed. There was no sudden transformation, no emotional breakthrough, no moment where everything suddenly made sense again. Just small shifts. The kind you only notice if you're paying attention. And Vanessa was. Derek didn't go back to how he had been, but he didn't become someone entirely different either. He was more present, not consistently, not perfectly, but noticeably He asked more questions. Not many, but more than before. How was your day? What are you working on this week? You getting enough rest? Simple things. But this time, he waited for the answers. That mattered, because before, questions had been routine. Now, they carried intention. Vanessa responded the same way she had been. Calm, clear, but she didn't overextend. She didn't fill in gaps that weren't being addressed. She matched his effort. No more, no less. That balance? It was new, and it changed the rhythm between them. There was less assumption, less automatic adjustment, more awareness, and awareness, even when it's quiet, can feel heavy, because it doesn't let things pass unnoticed anymore. One evening, they sat in the living room again, not talking much, but not disconnected either, just present in the same space. Derek glanced at his phone briefly, then set it down, face down. That was new. Vanessa noticed, not with suspicion, with recognition, because small actions reveal intent more than big words ever do. You've been different, Derek said after a moment. Vanessa looked at him. Have the first? She asked. Yes. He didn't elaborate immediately, like he was choosing his words more carefully now. You're not filling in the space anymore, he said. Vanessa nodded slightly. That's true. No explanation, no justification, just acknowledgement. Derek leaned back. I didn't realize how much you were doing that, he added. Vanessa held his gaze. Most people don't realize what they benefit from until it stops, she said. Not sharp, just honest. Derek absorbed that, because, again, it wasn't something he could argue with. I'm trying, he said. There it was. Not polished, not perfect, but real. Vanessa nodded once. I can see that. And that response? It wasn't reassurance. It was observation. Because effort doesn't earn trust immediately. It earns attention. Trust comes later, if it comes at all. That distinction mattered to Vanessa, because she wasn't measuring what he said. She was measuring what he did, consistently, over time. And that required patience. Not the kind she had practiced before. The kind that tolerates, but the kind that observes. There's a difference. Tolerance accepts things as they are. Observation evaluates whether they should stay that way. Vanessa had moved from one to the other, and that shift? It made everything clearer, but it also made everything more fragile. Because now, nothing was being ignored. And when nothing is ignored, everything matters. A few days later, Vanessa came home earlier than expected. The house was quiet. Derek wasn't there. That wasn't unusual. But this time, it felt different. Not because she was worried, but because she was aware. She set her bag down, walked into the kitchen, paused. Her eyes moved across the space, slowly. Nothing out of place, nothing obvious. But awareness doesn't always look for proof. It notices patterns. And right now, the pattern was still forming. Her phone buzzed. A message from Derek. Running a little late. I'll be home soon. Vanessa read it, then set her phone down. No reaction. No assumption. Just waiting. Not passively. Intentionally. Because this was the stage where things were tested. Not through confrontation, but through consistency. When Derek got home, everything felt normal. He greeted her, set his things down, moved through the house the way he always did. But Vanessa watched. Not closely. Just enough. How was your day? He asked. Good, she replied. And yours? Busy. A pause. Then, had a couple meetings run over. Vanessa nodded. About what? The same question, but now, it carried weight. Derek didn't hesitate as long this time. Expansion planning, he said. New partnership. More detail. Not complete, but more. And that mattered. Because change doesn't happen all at once. It builds, step by step. But Vanessa didn't relax. She didn't assume this meant everything was improving. Because she understood something clearly now. Consistency reveals truth. Not effort, not intention, not words. Consistency. And consistency takes time. That night, as they sat together again, the space between them felt different. Not distant, not close, just undefined. And that's where things are most fragile. Because they can move in either direction, toward rebuilding or toward breaking. And the difference isn't decided in one moment. It's decided in many small ones, repeated ones, the kind people usually overlook. But not this time, not for Vanessa, because now, she understood something she hadn't before. It's not the big moments that define a relationship, it's the small ones, that either hold it together, or quietly pull it apart. And she was watching all of them. Consistency doesn't prove itself in comfort, it proves itself under pressure. That's what Vanessa understood now. Not in theory, in practice. It's easy to be honest when nothing is at risk. Easy to show up when everything is calm. But real change? It shows itself in moments where it would be easier not to. A few days later, that moment came. It wasn't dramatic. No sudden discovery. No unexpected interruption. Just a regular evening. The kind that used to pass unnoticed. Vanessa was in the kitchen, preparing something simple. Derek was in the living room, his phone on the table beside him. Everything felt steady, not perfect, but stable enough to move forward. Then his phone lit up. Vanessa didn't look at it immediately. She didn't need to, because she had already decided something. She wasn't going to search for truth. She was going to let it show itself. Derek glanced at the screen and paused, just slightly, but enough. That pause? It mattered, because hesitation always reveals awareness. He picked up the phone, read the message, then looked up at Vanessa. She was still in the kitchen, not watching him, but present, aware, and for a moment, everything slowed. Because this was one of those moments, a small one, but defining. Derek stood, walked into the kitchen, not casually, intentionally. Clara just texted, he said. No delay, no adjustment, just truth. Vanessa turned slightly toward him, not surprised, not reactive, just listening. She asked if I'm available to meet tonight, he continued. A pause. Then, I told her no. Silence. But not the same kind of silence as before. This one was different, because it wasn't holding something back. It was holding something honest. Vanessa studied him for a moment, not searching for doubt, not questioning his tone, just taking it in. Okay, she said. Simple, but it carried something, recognition. Because this moment was different from everything before, not because of what he said, but because of how he said it, without being asked, without being prompted. That's what made it matter. Derek nodded slightly, then added, I should have told you about her earlier. Another step, not complete, but real. Vanessa leaned lightly against the counter. Yes, she said. No anger, just agreement. Derek exhaled slowly. It didn't feel like something that needed to be explained. He continued, but I see now that it was. Vanessa didn't interrupt, because now, he wasn't defending, he was reflecting, and reflection is where change begins to take shape. I got used to keeping things simple, Derek said, not saying more than necessary. He paused. That worked for me, he added, then looked at her, but it didn't work for us. Vanessa held his gaze, and for the first time, there was a shift in how she received his words. Not acceptance, but openness, because this was different, not polished, not strategic, just honest, and honesty, even when it's late, has value. But it also has limits, because timing matters, and Vanessa knew that. I'm not expecting this to fix anything immediately, she said. Derek nodded. I know, and I'm not going to act like everything is okay just because you're trying now. Clear, measured, real. Derek didn't argue, because there was nothing to argue with. I understand that too, he said, and again, it sounded different, because now, he wasn't trying to control the outcome, he was accepting the process. That's where things begin to shift, not when someone says the right words, but when they stop trying to fast forward the result. Vanessa straightened slightly, her posture calm, her expression steady. I'm paying attention, she said, not as a warning, as a statement, and that statement carried weight, because it meant something simple. Everything mattered now, not just the big moments, the small ones, the ones people usually overlook. Those were the ones she was watching, and those were the ones that would decide everything. Later that night, as they sat together again, the space between them felt different, still not close, still not fully connected, but no longer uncertain, because now, there was clarity on both sides. Not just about what had happened, but about what was required moving forward. And that clarity, it didn't make things easier, but it made them real. Vanessa looked at Derek briefly, not with suspicion, not with assumption, just awareness. And in that moment, she realized something important. This wasn't about whether he could change. It was about whether the change would last. And that answer couldn't be rushed. It had to be shown, over time, through consistency, through choices. The same way everything else had been built. And Vanessa? She was ready to see it clearly. No assumptions, no shortcuts, just truth. However it showed up. Change feels different when it's being watched. Not judged, not rushed, just observed. That's where their relationship was now. Not broken, not repaired, under evaluation. And evaluation doesn't rely on words. It relies on patterns. Over the next week, Vanessa didn't shift her behavior. She stayed consistent, calm, present, clear, but internally, she was measuring, not intentionally, not like a checklist, but naturally, because once you've seen clearly, you can't stop noticing. Derek's actions became easier to read, not because he changed dramatically, but because he stopped hiding behind routine. He spoke more, not constantly, not excessively, but more honestly. When he was running late, he said, why? When something came up, he explained it. When plans shifted, he didn't simplify it. Small changes, but consistent. And consistency is what Vanessa was watching for. One evening, he walked in earlier than expected. Not announced, not explained in advance. Just present. Vanessa was in the kitchen again. Another quiet night. Another ordinary moment. But now, ordinary moments carried weight. You're home early, she said. Derek nodded. Finished sooner than I thought. A pause. Then, I wanted to come back. Vanessa looked at him, not reacting, just hearing it. That statement, it mattered, not because it was emotional, but because it was intentional. He didn't just end his day. He chose to return, and choice was what everything came down to now. Vanessa nodded slightly. Okay, still grounded, still steady, but inside, something registered, not trust, but acknowledgement. Because trust doesn't rebuild in moments. It rebuilds in patterns, and this was one of them. Later that night, they sat across from each other again. Same positions, same space, but a different energy, less tension, more awareness. Derek leaned forward slightly. I've been thinking about what you said, he began. Vanessa didn't interrupt, because now, she let him speak fully. You were right, he said. Simple, direct, no explanation attached. That mattered, because it wasn't followed by justification. It stood on its own. I got comfortable doing things in a way that worked for me, he continued. And I didn't consider what that was doing to us. Vanessa held his gaze. That statement carried weight, because it showed something different. Perspective, not just acknowledgement of actions, but understanding of impact. That's what matters, she said. Not softly, not harshly, just clearly. Derek nodded. I know I can't just say that and expect things to go back to normal. Vanessa leaned back slightly. They're not going back to normal, she said. And that line? It wasn't emotional. It was final, not in ending, but in direction, because what they had before was built on something incomplete. And she wasn't returning to that. Derek absorbed it. No argument, no pushback, just understanding. Then what does this look like? He asked, a real question, not rhetorical, not strategic, open. Vanessa paused, not because she didn't have an answer, but because she wanted to say it clearly. It looks like honesty, she said, consistently. No elaboration, no extra explanation, because it didn't need it. Derek nodded. And if I do that? He asked. Vanessa met his eyes. Then we'll see. Not reassurance, not promise. Reality, because she wasn't offering outcomes anymore. She was offering conditions, and conditions require effort. Over time, that shift, it changed everything. Because now, this wasn't about fixing the relationship. It was about proving it could be rebuilt. And proof takes time. The next few days followed the same pattern. Not dramatic, but steady. Derek remained consistent, not perfect, but present, more open, more aware, more intentional. And Vanessa? She stayed the same, not guarded, not distant, just clear. She responded, she engaged, but she didn't overextend. She didn't return to filling gaps. She let things stand as they were. And, in that space, something important developed. Respect. Not the kind that comes from admiration, but the kind that comes from boundaries. Because when you stop overgiving, people begin to meet you differently. Not always, but when they do, it matters. One night, as Vanessa sat alone for a moment, she realized something. This wasn't about whether Derek was trying. He was. That part was clear. The real question was something deeper. Is this sustainable? Because effort in the moment is easy. Consistency over time is what reveals truth. And she wasn't going to rush that answer. Not anymore. Because now, she understood something fully. Love isn't just about staying. It's about what you're staying in. And she was no longer willing to stay in something unclear. No matter how comfortable it once felt, clarity doesn't rush you. It steadies you. That's what Vanessa felt now. Not pressure, not urgency. Just a quiet understanding that whatever decision came next had to match what she had already seen. Not what she hoped. Not what she feared. What was real? Over the next few days, nothing dramatic happened. No arguments, no breakthroughs, no sudden shift that forced things forward. And that, in itself, was revealing. Because for the first time, their relationship wasn't being driven by emotion. It was being shaped by consistency. And consistency is slower, but more honest. Derek continued showing up differently. He checked in. He explained things. He stayed present in conversations instead of moving through them. Not perfectly, but consistently enough to be noticed. And Vanessa noticed, but she didn't reward it immediately. Not because she didn't appreciate it, but because she understood something clearly now. Consistency isn't proven in a few days. It's proven over time. And she wasn't going to rush that process. One evening, they sat at the dining table again, the same place where conversations used to feel incomplete. Now, it felt different. Not full, but honest. Derek set his glass down and looked at her. "I know you're still watching," he said. Vanessa met his gaze. Yes. No denial. No softening. Just truth. Derek nodded. "I would be too," he added. That mattered, because it showed something new. Perspective. Not just awareness of his actions, but understanding of her position. Vanessa leaned back slightly. "I'm not trying to catch you," she said. "I'm trying to see if this is real. Clear, simple, unavoidable." Derek didn't argue, because again, there was nothing to argue with. "It is," he said. Vanessa held his gaze for a moment longer, then asked, "Can you sustain it?" That question landed differently, because it wasn't about now. It was about later, about pattern, about reality. Derek didn't answer immediately, not because he didn't want to, but because this wasn't a question you respond to quickly. It required something he wasn't used to offering, honest uncertainty. "I don't know," he said finally. And that? It mattered more than a confident answer, because it was real. Vanessa nodded slowly. "That's fair," she said. And for the first time, there was no tension in the space between them. Not because everything was resolved, but because everything was clear. There's a difference. Clarity doesn't always bring comfort, but it removes confusion. And confusion is what keeps people stuck. Vanessa stood and walked toward the kitchen, not to leave the conversation, but because it had reached its natural end. There was nothing more to add. Not right now. Later that night, as she sat alone in the living room, she allowed herself to think fully, not about Derek, about herself, about what she had learned, not just in the past few days, but over the years. She saw it clearly now. How she had shaped her life around maintaining peace. How she had adjusted instead of addressing. How she had mistaken stability for connection. And none of that made her weak. It made her practiced in a way of living that avoided discomfort, but also avoided truth. And now, she wasn't willing to live that way anymore. Not because of Derek, but because of herself. That distinction mattered, because decisions made for someone else don't last, but decisions made for yourself change everything. Vanessa took a slow breath, and in that moment, she reached something final, not emotional, not reactive, resolved. She wasn't deciding whether to leave, she was deciding how she would stay. And if staying didn't meet that standard, then leaving would no longer feel like loss. It would feel like alignment. That realization brought something unexpected. Not sadness, not anger, peace. The kind that doesn't come from avoiding problems, but from facing them clearly. The next morning, Vanessa moved through her routine the same way she had been, calm, but grounded in something new, certainty. Derek noticed it immediately. "You seem different again," he said. Vanessa looked at him. "I am." What changed? She held his gaze, then answered simply, "I know what I need now." No explanation, no elaboration, just truth. Derek nodded slowly, because he understood what that meant. Not fully, but enough. Enough to know that things were no longer uncertain. They were defined, and defined relationships require defined choices. The next step wasn't about what had happened, or even what was happening now. It was about what would continue, and that couldn't be assumed. It had to be shown. And Vanessa? She was ready to see it clearly. All the way through. It was 7:42 p.m. again. Not planned, not intentional, just. The same time, Vanessa noticed it as she stepped out of her car, glancing briefly at the clock on the dashboard. 7:42 p.m. The same minute everything had shifted weeks ago. And now, she was back, not because she needed to be, but because she chose to be. The restaurant looked exactly the same. Same warm lighting. Same quiet conversations. Same soft music drifting through the air. Nothing had changed. Except her. Vanessa stood at the entrance for a moment, not hesitating, just acknowledging, because this place, this exact space, held a version of her that no longer existed. The one who almost walked away. The one who didn't question. The one who chose comfort over clarity. And now, she wasn't that person anymore. She stepped inside. The host greeted her, but she barely noticed. Her eyes moved through the room naturally, not searching, not expecting, just present. She chose a table near the window. Not the same one, but close enough. That mattered. Not as a comparison, but as a quiet reminder of where things had changed. She sat down, placing her phone gently on the table. No distractions, no urgency, just stillness. There's a difference between returning to a place for answers and returning for closure. Vanessa wasn't here to discover anything. She already knew. She was here to see herself clearly, who she had been, who she had become, and whether those two versions could ever exist in the same life again. Her phone buzzed. A message from Derek. Running a little late. I'll be there soon. Vanessa looked at it, then looked up. Not around the room, just ahead, and something inside her settled. Not because of the message, but because of her reaction to it. There was no tension, no doubt, no instinct to check. Just awareness. Because now, she understood something she hadn't before. Trust isn't about what someone says. It's about whether their actions match it, consistently. And if they don't, you don't ignore it. You respond to it, calmly, clearly, without losing yourself. Vanessa picked up the menu, not because she needed it, but because she was allowing the moment to unfold naturally, not forcing meaning, not attaching emotion, just being present. A few minutes later, the door opened. Derek walked in. He paused briefly, scanning the room. Then his eyes found her, and something in his expression shifted. Not relief, recognition. Because this moment, it wasn't random. It meant something. Not because of the place, but because of where they were now. He walked toward her, not rushed, not hesitant, just steady. Hey, he said as he reached the table. Hey. Vanessa's tone matched his. Calm, grounded, real. He sat down across from her, the same position, but a different meaning. Neither of them spoke immediately, not because there was nothing to say, but because there was no need to fill the space. And that was new. I didn't realize this was the place, Derek said after a moment. Vanessa nodded slightly. It is. No tension, no weight in her tone, just truth. Derek leaned back slightly, taking in the space. I remember that night, he said. Vanessa looked at him. I do too. Another pause. But this one felt different, not heavy, just acknowledged. I've thought about it a lot, Derek added. Vanessa didn't respond immediately, because she wasn't measuring what he said. She was measuring what it meant, not just in words, but in everything that had followed. I didn't realize how much that moment would change things, he continued. Vanessa held his gaze. It didn't change things, she said. It revealed them. That distinction mattered, because change can feel sudden. But revelation? That shows you what was already there. Derek nodded slowly. I see that now, he said. And for the first time, it didn't sound like something he had learned recently. It sounded like something he had accepted. There's a difference. Vanessa leaned back slightly in her chair. Her posture relaxed. Not guarded, not defensive, just grounded. I'm not here to revisit that night, she said. Derek looked at her. Then why are you here? He asked. Vanessa paused, not because she didn't know, but because she wanted to say it clearly. I wanted to see if this still feels the same, she said. Simple, direct, honest. Derek's expression shifted slightly. And does it? He asked. Vanessa looked around the room briefly, then back at him. No, she said. No hesitation, no uncertainty, just truth. And that answer? It carried everything. Not because it meant everything was fixed, but because it meant something had changed. In her, in how she saw things, in what she was willing to accept. And that was the real resolution. Not perfection. Not a perfect relationship, but a clear one. One where she didn't lose herself to maintain it. One where truth mattered more than comfort. One where love, if it existed, had to stand on something real. Vanessa looked at Derek one more time. Not searching, not questioning, just seeing him clearly, and that clarity, it was something she would never give up again. For a while, neither of them spoke, not because there was nothing left to say, but because what mattered now wasn't more words. It was what those words had already revealed. The waiter came, took their order, and left. Another ordinary moment. But nothing about this felt ordinary anymore. Vanessa sat back in her chair, her hands resting lightly on the table. She wasn't tense, wasn't uncertain, just present. Derek watched her for a moment, not trying to figure her out, just seeing her, and maybe for the first time, he saw her clearly. Not as someone who adjusted, not as someone who made things easier, but as someone who had chosen to stop doing that. You're different, he said quietly. Vanessa gave a small nod. I am. No hesitation, no explanation, because she didn't need to justify growth. Derek leaned forward slightly. I can see it, he added. Vanessa held his gaze. That's because I stopped ignoring things, she said. Simple, but it carried everything. Derek exhaled slowly. I wish I had seen it sooner, he said. Vanessa shook her head gently. It wouldn't have mattered, she replied. He frowned slightly. Why not? Vanessa paused. Not because she didn't have an answer, but because she wanted him to understand it fully. Because I wasn't ready to see it sooner, she said. Honest, not blaming him, not blaming herself. Just true. And that truth? It changed the weight of everything. Because it wasn't just about what he had done. It was about how she had been living, and how she wasn't going to live that way anymore. Their food arrived. They ate slowly, not awkwardly, not forced, just quietly. And in that quiet, something settled between them. Not resolution, but acceptance of what had been, of what was, of what could be, if it was built differently. After a while, Derek set his fork down. I don't expect things to go back to how they were, he said. Vanessa nodded. They won't. Clear, final. Derek looked at her. But I do want to move forward, he added. There it was. Not a promise, not a guarantee. A direction. Vanessa held his gaze. And what does that look like to you? She asked. Derek didn't answer immediately, because now, he understood something he hadn't before. This wasn't a question you answer quickly. It was one you answer honestly. It looks like showing up differently, he said. Consistently. Vanessa watched him, not reacting, just listening. It looks like not deciding what you need for you, he continued, and actually asking. Another step, another layer of awareness. Vanessa nodded slowly. That's part of it, she said, not approval. Recognition, because now, this wasn't about convincing her. It was about aligning with something real. And what does it look like to you? Derek asked. Vanessa leaned back slightly, her expression calm, grounded. It looks like me not losing myself to keep things stable, she said. Direct, clear, and if I have to do that again. She paused slightly. I won't stay. Silence, not heavy, just understood. Because that wasn't a threat. It was a boundary. And boundaries don't need to be loud to be real. Derek nodded slowly. I hear you, he said. And this time, it didn't feel like something he said out of habit. It felt like something he accepted, completely. Vanessa looked at him for a moment longer, then gave a small nod, not agreement, acknowledgement, because now, they both understood where things stood, not perfectly, but clearly, and clarity is what allows something real to exist, not fantasy, not assumption, truth. After they finished eating, they stood outside the restaurant, the same place where everything had shifted weeks ago, but now, it felt different, not because the situation had changed completely, but because she had. Vanessa looked around briefly, then back at Derek. There was no dramatic ending, no emotional declaration, no perfect resolution, just a quiet understanding that whatever came next would be built on something different, or not built at all. I'll call you when I get home, Derek said. Vanessa nodded. Okay, simple, but steady. They didn't linger, didn't force a moment, because not everything needs to be stretched to feel meaningful. Some things are meaningful because they're clear. Vanessa got into her car, sat there for a moment, not thinking about what could have been, not replaying what had already happened, just present. And in that presence, she felt something settle, not relief, not happiness in the usual sense, something quieter, dignity, the kind that comes from choosing yourself, without anger, without regret, just clarity. She started the engine, and as she drove away, she didn't feel like she was leaving something behind. She felt like she was moving forward, finally, because love, real love, isn't about holding on no matter what. It's about knowing when something is honest enough to stay in, and when it isn't, having the strength to choose differently. Vanessa had learned that, not from a single moment, but from many small ones, the kind people usually ignore, until they change everything. If you made it to the end of this story, then you already know. This wasn't just about betrayal, it was about the small choices we ignore, the silence we justify, and the moment we finally decide to see things clearly. So let me ask you, what would you have done in Vanessa's position? Would you have stayed, or would you have walked away? Drop your answer in the comments. I really want to hear your perspective. And if this story made you think differently about love, trust, and self-respect, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson for more powerful, real-life stories like this. Because sometimes, the smallest decisions are the ones that change everything.